Welcome to the For Your Good podcast, formerly known as the Kingdom Assistant. I am your host, Hudson. I am a wife, a mother, a marriage and faith coach, and most importantly, I'm a woman of God. And I want this podcast to be your weekly reminder that God works everything out for your good. So, as I stated before, this podcast was formerly known as the Kingdom Assistant, and I took a hiatus away from podcasting for a little bit. And in today's episode, I want to get a little more into that and just explaining my hiatus, what I've learned. So, today I wanted to talk about the process of time. In my hiatus away from podcasting, the Lord had me in a couple stories in the Bible, and the first one that He had me in was Hannah. And for those of you who don't know the story of Hannah, Hannah was married, and Hannah's husband had a second wife. And Hannah was barren, so Hannah couldn't conceive. She couldn't bear any children. And her husband's second wife would provoke her and basically mock her and laugh at her because she didn't have children. And in the story of Hannah, we see that Hannah one day goes to the temple of the Lord to petition the Lord for a son. And Eli, the priest, is there. And Eli sees Hannah on her knees praying. And it says that her lips weren't moving, but she was praying in her heart. And because her lips weren't moving and sound wasn't coming out, Eli assumed that she was drunk. And Eli said to her, "What are you doing here? Basically, why are you drinking? You shouldn't be here." And Hannah said, "I'm not drunk. I am sorrowful. My spirit is grieved," and that she is petitioning to the Lord. And Eli said to her, "Well, the Lord grant your petition." And so the prayer that Hannah had petitioned the Lord for, or the promise or the thing that Hannah petitioned God for, was a baby. And Hannah said, "Lord, if you bless me with a baby, I will give that baby back to you." And it says shortly after, Hannah went back home and she knew her husband, which is she was intimate with her husband. And it says in the process of time, Hannah conceived and gave birth to a son. When I'm reading the word, I always think about the things, or I focus on the things that really stand out to me. And that process of time, that stood out to me the most. And after doing some research and just breaking things down and really seeking revelation from the Holy Spirit, He revealed to me what that really meant. And so I want to just first, before I break down what that means, talk about my process and what it was like. And I pray that in hearing my process, others will understand that they are not alone. Others will understand maybe the right way to get through a process that God is bringing you through, or if it's similar to mine, to help you to find a new way to get through the process. So when I first started this podcast, all that I knew was that God had called me to ministry. God has called me to ministry since 2018. And I was doing YouTube for a little bit, and I wanted to stop because my YouTube channel was about marriage. And I saw that all across YouTube in the faith community, they had been talking about, kingdom spouses and kingdom marriages. And I admit that it became oversaturated. And not only did it become oversaturated, it was hard to trust people. I really felt like a lot of people were exploiting the faith community because they knew that we needed answers. They knew that we really believe in marriage and we wanted marriage. And I didn't want other people to see me talking about marriage and lump me in with those people that I knew were being dishonest. So I was like, "Lord, I don't want to do this anymore." I knew that I was helping people, but I wanted to run away because, like I said, I didn't want to be lumped in, but I also wanted to be able to explore different facets of marriage. I was tired of talking about marital separation and infidelity and what that looked like and how to overcome, because yes, that was a part of my story, but I wanted to talk about the after. And it seemed like nobody was really interested in talking about the after. And so I started to struggle with this feeling that I was being used by a lot of people. I was being used because they saw that I could offer them answers. And so I said, "Lord, not only do I not want to be lumped in with these other people that are being dishonest, but I don't want to become an idol." I felt like a lot of people were looking at me like an idol. They wanted to reach out because they felt like I had all the answers, and they felt like, seeing what I went through, maybe their husbands would feel the same way, or maybe it would end up the same way. And it was really difficult for me. So I knew God was still calling me to do it, but I kind of bartered with God. I said, "God, if you want me to do this, I want to do it my way." And I'm just being frank, right? I want to do it my way. I want to do a podcast. I would much rather do a podcast where I don't have to make these YouTube videos and I don't have to go on live and give all these people answers and sit in this feeling of like I'm being used and, all these different feelings that I had. So I started the podcast. And initially I started the podcast with my best friend. And then I went back to it and I did it with my husband. And at first I was like, "Okay, we can do this. People really like it," but my heart still wasn't in it. So I stopped and I pivoted into, okay, I'm just going to make content on TikTok and Instagram. And I saw that it helped a lot of people. And I was like, "Okay, this is great." But I still felt like this nudge from God. That was the best way to explain it. This nudge that He was telling me I needed to do something, and I didn't know what it was. And so throughout that time, I'm seeking the Lord. I'm trying to figure out what he wants me to do and the way that he wants me to do it. And I found myself like really in a place where I was unclear and I was uncertain and I wasn't sure of myself anymore. And I knew I was running from God. I knew that I was running from God. And what I know now is I was trying to convince myself that I didn't need to do those things anymore. I convinced myself that whatever God needed me to do, it wasn't the marriage talk. It wasn't going back to YouTube and putting videos out there. It had to be something else. And I racked my brain around it. And so then I kind of just took my mind off of the podcast and the marriage thing, and I focused on, okay, what can I do on TikTok and Instagram to help people? How can I expand my ministry? How can I sustain myself through ministry without being judged, without exploiting people? Because I feel like a lot of times in ministry, people will exploit the community. They'll do things to get a lot of money. I didn't want to be that person, so I focused on that. And even in that, I'm like, God, something is missing. I don't know what it is, but I feel like there's more, and I'm not catching it. And I found myself in a place where I was experiencing so much warfare. So I'm making this content on TikTok and Instagram. I'm not sure if I should be doing it. I'm not sure if I'm even helping people. I'm in this full-time ministry and I'm doing all these things. And I'm trusting or trying to trust that God is going to make a way for us. He's going to have our bills paid. We're going to have groceries and things like that. And it becomes extremely difficult. And over time, the warfare increases. And not only are now we dealing with, having to trust God financially and trusting that he'll expand our business, but now our marriage is starting to take hit. Our health is starting to take hit. Now our children are starting to take hits. And I find myself in a Job season. And recently that's where I've been. I'm in this Job season where every facet of my life has been affected. And while my life is being affected, God is still expecting me to show up for the people that need me. I still need to partake in ministry. Here I am helping these women and coaching these women when behind closed doors, I'm seeking God for answers and I'm unsure. And I'm praying fervently and I don't see anything happening and I'm crying out to God. And now my relationship with God becomes rocky because now my perspective of God has changed a little bit. And I want to just say that I want to share all of this because I want people to understand that relationship with Christ will have ebbs and flows just like relationships with a friend or a cousin, whatever. And we as humans will have these emotions and these feelings toward God. And I'm not saying that it is okay. I'm not saying that, we should feel this way. But what I'm saying is it's important that when you feel these ways towards God, where maybe you feel like you've been wronged or you're hurt or you're disappointed, to bring it to God. Because one thing that I struggled with was when I did feel that way, I felt like I wasn't allowed to. I'm not allowed to be angry with God because he's God. Who am I to have frustrations? Who am I to be disappointed? So I just kept it on the hush. I know God already knew. I didn't even have to say it because God knows our heart, but I never felt comfortable saying it out loud to God because I felt like I was disrespecting him. And I didn't realize until now I'm in this place of warfare that I'm like, wow, that hurt my relationship with the Lord. Me not being completely honest with God and telling him, hey, I'm disappointed and here's how I feel. It kept me in a place where I was obedient to God, but I was being obedient for the wrong reason. And it doesn't mean I was being obedient just for his blessings, but I was being obedient just because I knew it's what I needed to do. But in my heart, I didn't feel like God was close to me anymore. I didn't want to hurt God. I didn't want to disappoint him. But at the same time, I was wondering, God, do you care about me as much as you care about these people, these other people that I need to help? So here I am in this place of warfare. My relationship with God is rocky. It's hard for me to pick up a Bible. It was hard for me to pray. I mean, I would pray throughout the day, but I couldn't sit down and formally pray like I would. I would put a lot of time into, just praying and talking to him. And I love God so much, but I just couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it. So recently, like I said, back to the beginning, God brought me to Hannah, and I'm reading in Hannah, and I'm understanding that now that everything that I had experienced from being laid off through all the warfare and, my heart not being in the right place with certain things was my process. That was God's process for me. And throughout that process, I had struggled with my perception of the process because what I thought that it was, okay, Lord, maybe I'm doing something wrong. Maybe you're upset with me because I haven't been praying and you're upset with me because I feel disappointed. My perception of that process was, maybe you feel like I don't deserve it, Lord. Maybe this is just warfare. Like it's just straight up warfare and I got to rebuke it. I saw it as maybe God is punishing me because I just haven't been doing right. And then I started to condemn myself. After reading in Hannah and doing the research about the process of time, I now understand what that really means. The biblical definition of the process of time, right, is to increase or to become great. So a lot of times we despise God's process or the process of time, because a lot of times the process of time will come with the suffering. And I know that a lot of people struggle to have an understanding or an acceptance of faith and suffering. Why does my faith in you have to come with suffering? Why do I have to suffer so much for the sake of this ministry or the kingdom or whatever it is you need me to suffer for? Why? And what I realize is that when you despise the process, when you despise the suffering, it brings on this spirit of self-righteousness. Now you're focused on how you feel, and you're no longer seeing the value in God's character. In coming to understand that and understanding that, okay, I have to remember God's character. Like I said, I felt like I was in this Job season, so now I'm reading Job. And I think that Job is a really tough book for a lot of us, because we see that Job is righteous, and it's hard for us to wrap our minds around why God would allow the enemy to attack or to try to shift the life of a righteous man, a man who we can assume did everything right, a man who we can assume was after God's own heart, and he served the Lord and he was obedient. God, why would you do that? And in reading Job, there were so many different things that I picked up, and I've read Job before, but sometimes God will tell you to go back, because there's always a new revelation to glean from the word, right? And we have to remember that when God tells you to go back and read a story or read a chapter of the Bible or a book or even a verse, even if you read it a million times, when you go back to it, you ask the Holy Spirit to allow you the eyes to see this new perception or revelation that he's trying to give to you, okay? So I'm reading Job again for the umpteenth time, and what I realized was that Job had forgotten God's character. Job was a righteous man, but Job was so righteous that he had become self-righteous. Self-righteous to the point where he forgot God's character. We see in the book of Job, Job's friends came and they tried to explain why things were happening. And we see that God was displeased with them, because what they ended up doing was trying to speak for God, right? Well, maybe, this happened because you did the wrong thing. And what I noticed that was when Job's friends started to question those things, Job was ready to say, hey, look, I'm a man of integrity. And I noticed that as soon as he would talk to his friends and explain to his friends, hey, I have integrity, he would then go right back to almost being miserable, right? And pitying himself. And we know he's miserable because he lost everything, but there was always a flip-flop. And what I realized was that if Job had for a second remembered God's character, would he have been in a place where he was so self-pitying? Would he have been in a place where his friends felt that it was okay to be able to give him advice that they gave him? If Job for a second had remembered God's character, he would have been able to have a different perspective on his suffering. And now looking at the story of Hannah and the story of Job, I think it's so interesting. We see the different types of sufferers. Okay, we have the self-righteous sufferers, and then we have the sufferers that have the right perception and view of God's character. And a lot of us are like Job, where we suffer and we become self-righteous. Because God, how long am I going to have to suffer for you? How long is my obedience going to bring suffering? Because Lord, I'm ready for this to end. We have to remember Jesus suffered for us. Jesus lost his life for us. But when you look at your own life, you see, have I ever had to be in that position where I'm losing my life for the sake of love? We have to get to a place where we can ask ourselves, if someone came up to me right now and said, hey, do you serve the Lord? And if you say yes, your life has to end right now. Would you be willing to say yes? Are you willing to lay your life down for Christ? And if the answer is no, that is why you struggle with the idea of suffering and faith, and why we have to suffer for love. So we have to make sure that in this process of time that God brings us through, where we experience these suffering, that we choose to be the right sufferer. The sufferer like Hannah, where I'm suffering and I feel like I have lack and I'm being mocked and ridiculed and I'm feeling sorrowful and my heart is grieved. But Lord, I'm not going to question your wisdom. I'm going to believe that you are still good, that you are still powerful. And even though I want this thing so badly, I'm asking for this thing, I'm still going to dedicate this thing to you. And that brings me to the next thing I want to say, is that a lot of us, when God gives us certain things, we are not willing to dedicate it back to God. Some of us want our marriages to be restored. Some of us want children and families and love, but we're not even willing to say, hey, God, I know I want this thing so bad, but I'm going to make sure that when you give me this thing, I give it right back to you, that I am willing to dedicate this thing to you. Meaning if I get this marriage, I'm not going to walk through this marriage on my own accord, in my own flesh. I'm going to seek you on how to do this thing. If I have this child, I'm not going to raise this child in a way that I think is right, but I'm going to seek you for wisdom every step of the way. Hannah's dedication of her child to the Lord was a physical, like, hey, I'm dedicating my son to you. But it was also a spiritual thing. A lot of us don't want to suffer. We don't want the process. And then we finally do get blessed. We don't even want to give it back to God. We don't even want God's help. We don't want to dedicate this thing that God has given us. We don't want that. So here I am in the midst of my warfare, in the midst of my pruning, and God drops this revelation on me. Zay, not only are you in this process of time, my process of time, but you're also in a Job season, and you're suffering like Job, not just literally where facets of your life have been affected, but Zay, you are being self-righteous in your suffering, which stopped me from being able to remember God's character. It stopped me from being able to see the goodness still in God's process of time and the goodness in the suffering. So through all of that, God was able to bring my heart right back to here, podcasting, helping people. Because one thing that I realized through God's process of time for me, the increase that God was doing, the process of trying to make me great, was removing my pride, number one. And my pride showed up in a way where I wasn't willing to allow other people to serve me. So here I am praying and I want to help other people. But when someone wants to help me in some type of way, I'm like, it's okay, right? Because I'm thinking, I don't want to burden these people. I don't want anybody to, feel like I'm taking too much time with them or whatever. But really what it was, God revealed to me, is that I don't want someone to be able to throw anything back in my face. I don't want anyone to look at me and think that I am incapable or that I am a failure. And God had to remove that from me. And why he had to remove that from me was also because I realized that a lot of times we say, God, use me. God, use me. You have to be okay with God using you, yes, for other people, but understand that there will be moments where God will now also have to literally use you for somebody else. And what I mean by that is, what if there's someone who God is needing to learn how to serve and God chooses you for that person to serve? But you are so filled up with pride that now you are getting in the way of that person being pruned. And I had to realize that if God calls us all to serve, there will be people that have to serve us. And we have to allow ourselves to be served. And through all the pruning in the process, God showed me, and I had to lay that down because he put me in a position where now I have to be served. People want to help me and pray for me and sow into me, and I'm uncomfortable with that. God needed me to be comfortable because in this walk, in ministry, and serving his kingdom, there will be people that need to serve you. Not only that, I was lacking confidence. I wasn't sure that I could do this, that I was qualified, because I said, God, I sit in front of this camera and no one's going to listen to me. I'm just Zay. I am a nobody. I don't have millions of followers. I don't have millions of views. Why even do this, right? God had to take that out of me too, because I had to remember that I can't have any shame in doing what God has called me to do. Because if God told me to go stand out on the street and go talk to 3 people, I need to be willing to do that. Because I have to understand that all of this is bigger than me. It's bigger than just sitting in front of this camera and having a podcast and getting views. Because even if I just help one person, even if just one person sees this podcast or sees a video, or they see a way that I break down the word and it helps them and it blesses them, I have done enough. I've done a good deed. There was so much that God was literally needing to bring out of me or to increase inside of me so that I could walk this walk out the right way. And when I started the podcast before, I thought, okay, maybe I'm just not supposed to be doing it because my heart wasn't in it. But that's not what it was. God was taking me through the process of time. And at the end of that process, it became the right time. And now I'm able to sit here and to make this video and sit in front of this camera by myself and not have the worry that no one's going to care, no one's going to listen. And now my heart's in the right place where I can say, even if 3 people see this and they get something from it, I've done a good deed. I have helped. And that is amazing. And that is okay if it's only 3 people. It is okay if someone sees me and they think, who is this chick and what is she doing and what is she talking about? I can't care so much about that it takes me away from the care of the kingdom and what God needs me to do. One last thing that I want to talk about that I have learned throughout all of this process of time that God has me in is the mental health and how important mental health is. And when I said that the enemy attacked every facet of my life, I mean mental health. And it was me, it was my husband. And my husband and I are now in this place where we are dealing with something that we've never dealt with before. It's like a brand new obstacle. And at first, when we discovered it, I went to God. I'm like, God, here's another thing. Just another, another wrench thrown into the machine, right? Just when you feel like you got the machine oiled up and, it's working, here's a wrench. But I thank God for the process of time, for his process of time, because I was able to very quickly see how God is going to turn this around for my good. And so why I want to talk about mental health is because I want you all to understand that as a married couple, your mental health can affect things in such a magnificent way. And I don't mean magnificent like an amazing way. I mean, magnificent, like a huge way. Not only has God shown up for my husband and I, you guys know the story, everything that we've gone through. But it has taught me that restoration is everlasting. When God says he's going to restore you, it is an everlasting thing. A lot of us think that restoration is a one and done. We want our marriages to be restored. We want our husbands to come back. And we think right away when they get back, it's just going to be amazing. Like, it's just going to happen. He's going to come back home or she's going to come back home and boom, it's all good. That's what I thought until I got in it and I realized that God restores us every month, every day, every year. And through that restoration process, my husband and I were able to come to a place where now we are so much on one accord that we are now seeking out other ways to help each other. And one of those ways is therapy. My husband and I have decided that we're going to actually go to therapy now because all these years we've been doing it on our own, trying to navigate things, through the word and trying to just communicate. And we've gotten to a place now where we understand that our marriage is so fragile. Not that anything could happen, it'll just break us, but fragile, meaning that it is delicate. And we have to do everything we possibly can to make sure that there's no hairline fractures, to make sure that nothing happens. Because through all the warfare and all the pruning, my husband and I find ourselves in a place where we were almost looking at each other like we were the enemy. And what I said to my husband was, whenever we see couples lose a baby or lose a child, you would think that it causes them to come back together and get closer, but you realize a lot of them will divorce. But now I get it, because when the enemy attacks a certain facet of your marriage and you and your husband are not in a place to understand that, wait a minute, we are a team, it is very easy to blame each other. You point fingers at each other. You want to blame each other because you're so stressed out. You can't blame the kids. You can't blame anybody else. So because of proximity, I'm going to blame you. And we find ourselves blame each other. But really in the core of our hearts, we both want the same thing. And my husband and I had a moment where we were able to come together and we were able to really get back on the right page and see things for what it was. So we're going to do what's necessary because our marriage is so fragile and delicate and it is so precious. So I say all this to say, y'all, remember that the process of time is really God increasing you and causing you to be great. The process is not to hurt you. The process is not to humiliate you or shame you or make you feel like God doesn't care for you or that God is punishing you, but it is literally to increase you. And in that process, there will be suffering. Throughout life, there will be suffering. The Bible tells us that there will be suffering. When you give your life to Christ, we will share in suffering with him. But you have to make sure that you are choosing to be the right sufferer. Will you be like Hannah or will you be like Job? And most importantly, when it comes to your endeavors with Christ, when God has called you to do something, when there is an assignment on your life, and maybe you started it up and maybe it didn't work out. And maybe you're like, God, maybe I heard you wrong. Maybe you're feeling like you're not qualified. You have to practice using strategy in that. Don't just run and jump into it and do it, but say, God, is this the right time? Because there will be times where God will tell you something beforehand. God will plant a seed beforehand. Hey, I want you to start this nonprofit. And we may think, oh my gosh, right now? And so we hear it and we're like, okay, let's do it because we don't want to be disobedient, right? We know delayed disobedience is still disobedience. So God may be sharing with you right now what to do, and it may not be something that you have to start now, but he's sharing it now so that you understand that the process of time that is coming after this is going to increase you for this thing that I'm telling you now. So when God said to me, I want you to go out there and speak the word, when I felt like I needed to do a podcast, at the time it wasn't the right time. But God told me that thing because he knew that there was going to be a process of time afterwards. And at the end of that time, I was going to be made great for that. I was going to be made great for this podcast. I was going to be made great for this ministry and everything that he's called me to. So I thank you guys for tuning in. Like I said, I'm getting to a place where I can be comfortable sitting in front of a camera, not needing somebody, because that's how I used to feel. I needed somebody because who am I? Who's going to listen to me? Am I really qualified? I felt like Jeremiah. I am a child. Lord, I just became an adult. I'm just now figuring out how to be an adult, right? That's how I felt. But I'm here now because of that process, and I'm so thankful. I pray that you were able to take something from this. Pray I was able to break it down. You guys can follow the podcast on Instagram at For Your Good Pod. You can find me personally on Instagram at ZaeHudson, TikTok, Zaisha Hudson, and on YouTube, it's ZaeHudson. It may be Zaisha Hudson too. Either way, type in one of those names, you'll find me. Follow me so that you can stay updated and connected on when I post new episodes. I also will be introducing my Patreon. So once this podcast episode is posted, you will be able to join my Patreon, where you guys will be able to have early access to the podcast episodes, and I want it to be a private community where we talk about marriage in a very intimate setting. I want to be able to have a private community of supporters where we can share, we can network and connect, and we can just be as honest and open as we need to be. I want to be able to do live streams. I want to have Q&As with you all. I really want to grow more of a community and network where there's no judgment and it's just a safe space. Men, women, I want us to be able to come together and really talk. And I pray that you guys will be blessed from everything that God is calling me to put my hands to. So I thank you so much. I will see you guys soon. Thank you again for tuning in. Bye.